Hey guys, as you probably already know, one of the nice features of the HydraSynth is that it's very intuitive and easy to program. But I found that one thing that is not intuitive or easy to figure out is how to program distinct volume envelopes. So today we're going to look at just that, and along the way, hopefully you can pick up some tips and shortcuts. First of all, we're going to talk about changing waveforms. We're going to talk about the mixer section, how to solo oscillators, how to create our distinct volume envelopes, and finally, we'll talk about modulation assigning shortcuts. All right, let's start by creating a patch. We're going to first initialize our current patch to a basic saw wave by hitting init twice. If we look at oscillator 1, we have our saw wave. For the sake of this video, we're going to make oscillator 2 and oscillator 3 completely different sounding waves, so when we hear the envelopes, they'll be perfectly clear and easy to hear. So oscillator 2, we'll go to clangor, it's a bell-like sound, high-pitched, go to clangor 2. Oscillator 3, we'll set that to sine, and to make it even more clear, we'll drop it down 2 octaves. Now if we hit a key, we're only hearing our sawtooth wave. So why is that? Well, if we go to our mixer, we have oscillator 1 at a volume of 128, which is the max volume. So that's why we can hear that. If we look, oscillator 2 and 3 are at 0, so we don't have them going to produce any volume. So let's max them out. Now you can set them at any value in between if you wanted to blend them differently, but for the sake of hearing them all equally well, you should hear all 3. Now you might think, well, it would be nice to be able to just listen to one of those oscillators at a time and hear what each one sounds like. Well, you could do that by turning the volume down of all the other oscillators, but there's an easier way. We can just hit the solo function, and then when we hit oscillator 3, the light there brightens, and we should just hear oscillator 3, which is our sine. If we go to oscillator 2, that is our clangor, and oscillator 1 is our saw. If I hit that again to unsolo it, all 3 lights are the same. We should hear all 3 again. We can also do the same by just taking the solo off. Now, here's where things get a bit tricky. Envelope 2 is hardwired to the amp section of the keyboard. There are 2 important things to remember when creating distinct volume envelopes for each oscillator. First is that envelope 2 has the final say for all volume-related envelopes. This means that all other volume envelopes need to happen within the shape of envelope 2. Second is that if you want the other oscillators to behave independently from envelope 2, you have to turn those oscillators' volume to 0 in the mixer. So we'll turn those back to 0. You can still solo them in the mixer section as long as you have an envelope assigned to that oscillator's volume. So let's say you want to create an oscillator sound with a slow attack and another oscillator sound with a fast attack. Make sure envelope 2 has the fast attack, because everything's going to happen within the shape of envelope 2. So let's take a look at an example. Let's send envelope 3 to oscillator 2 and have it modulate the volume of oscillator 2. An easy way to do that, a shortcut, is to just hold down envelope 3 and mixer at the same time, which brings up this screen. We can see that envelope 3 is being assigned to the mixer of oscillator 1 and is controlling the volume, but we want it oscillator 2, so we'll bump it up to 2. We'll max that volume out. And now if we go back to oscillator 2, we can still hear it even though it's set to 0. Now we can take the envelope of that. If we notice, the attack is a really fast attack, so attack is how quickly it ramps up to the max volume, so it's instantaneous. But we can take that and let's exaggerate it and put it like 8 seconds. So now when I hit the key, it'll take a little while for it to ramp up to that volume. Now if we go back to oscillator 1, we notice in oscillator 1 we haven't assigned it an envelope, but since in the mixer section we have it at a value other than 0, it assigns itself by default to envelope 2. And if we look at envelope 2, that has a fast attack. So if we go back to oscillator 1 and solo it, we're going to have that fast attack on the saw wave. Now let's assign envelope 4 to oscillator 3. So envelope 4 in the mixer, we're going to send to oscillator 3's volume to modulate. We'll turn that all the way up. And let's create an envelope for that. So envelope 4, we have a fast attack. So that is different than the saw wave. We're going to give it a little bit of an attack, but not so much as envelope 3, which is controlling oscillator 2. So let's do an attack of 4. So if we go back and we listen to all the oscillators now, oscillator 1, the saw, should come in immediately. Oscillator 3, which is assigned to the sine wave, should come in next, and oscillator 2, the bell clangor sound, should come in last. So let's unsolo them. So here's all 3. Saw, sine, clangor. So now let's talk about releases in the envelopes. So if we go back to envelope 3, actually let's go to envelope 4. And we're going to increase the release of envelope 4 to 3 seconds. Okay, we'll go back to the mixer and solo envelope 3. So we should hear it slowly fade in, the sine, and then when we take our finger off, it should keep going for a little bit. But it doesn't. It stops. So why is that? We programmed the long release for envelope 4. Well, if you remember, envelope 2, everything defaults to envelope 2. We have to fit everything within envelope 2. So if an envelope 2 has this fast release. So if we wanted envelope 4 to have the slow release, we got to have envelope 2 doing an even longer release so envelope 4 fits within it. So let's do that. We're going to go to envelope 2, and we're going to go to the release. And we had a 4-second release there, so let's have a 8-second release. So now that release is longer than the release, the 4-second release in envelope 4, so we should hear that release happen on oscillator 3. So when I take my finger off, it'll still keep sounding. And it does. And if we go back to 1, it's still sounding as well because it has an even longer release. So remember that if you want to have distinct envelopes for each oscillator, make sure the mixer's volume for those oscillators are 0. So we go back to the mixer. So oscillator 2 and 3, we want distinct volumes that are distinct envelopes that are different than oscillator 1. We have to have 0 there. And if for some reason we forgot, and let's forget and put them all the way back up, they're just going to track now what envelope 2 does, and that's our shape of envelope 2. So all of them right now are going to track that shape. So let's unsolo them. So here's all 3. Hopefully you picked up a trick or two in this video. If so, make sure to give it a like, and happy programming.